Hi, everyone. This is our third class in the Transmedia semester of spring 2020, class 3 of Toolbox. And today you've got a copy of your workbook. So this is on page 12. And for class 3, today what we're going to be discussing is logline, premise, and summary, but we're also going to talk about some examples and how you can begin to brainstorm what the premise and logline will be for your semester project. Okay, let's get started. Okay, here you can see the 10 classes that we're having this semester. And class 1 and 2 we have gone through already, and class 3 is logline, premise, and summary. So the premise is an idea for a story. It's the setup or the situation with little or no story implied. We did talk about this a little bit in the previous class. The premise is rarely written down to be presented in any kind of official capacity. The logline is more full. It's written in 1 or 2 lines. You want to get the central situation and almost always the main character. But also you want to communicate the sense of tone and give an idea of where the story leads. A successful logline includes the character and the character's goal. And maybe you want to also include the impediment to their goal or the antagonistic force. So here, for example, is an example of, let's say, can we boil it down to a good one and a bad one? Okay, a boy and girl fall in love, but a tragic event changes their lives forever. Now, some of you have watched Titanic, and although this premise is true for the film Titanic, it's not quite as full as the logline underneath it. A young aristocrat falls for a scrappy artist aboard the main voyage of the Titanic. The looming tragedy will either be the end of their love story or their struggle to survive will redefine love altogether. You can see the difference between these two. So even though the premise does describe Titanic, the logline has a lot more details, tone. It gives you a clue to the genre, for example, and what's going to happen and what is going to get in the way of that happening. Okay. A summary, on the other hand, and you guys will be writing a summary as well for your semester project. It's much longer, so it can be a paragraph, it can be up to 2 pages. And right now, I want us to try to guess the film, okay? The lives of 2 mob hitmen, a boxer, a gangster's wife, and a pair of diner bandits intertwine in 4 tales of violence and redemption. Are you guessing? I'm going to give you a couple seconds in your comments. Okay. Did you guess Pulp Fiction? All right. What would the premise be? That's my next question. So you just took the log line, right? You guys probably guessed it was Pulp Fiction. And now what I'd like you to do in the comments section, try to write a premise for it. Give it a little practice. But furthermore, let's look at the summary. You can see how much longer this is. So here you actually have 6 paragraphs. that describe Pulp Fiction. Much longer, many more details. It gets much more in depth. It gives the overall story, the plot, the premise is included here, obviously. It gives the challenges to the characters and their general goals. So if you're looking at your semester project for Idle Days on the Yawn, within the treatment, it's asking for a summary. And something like this is actually what we're looking for your exam. Let's play again. Okay, guess the film. A wheelchair-bound photographer spies on his neighbors from his apartment window and becomes convinced one of them has committed murder. Go ahead and guess in the comment section. Okay. Did you guess Rear Window? Awesome if you did. What would a premise be for Rear Window? Would that premise apply to potentially other films? Potentially. But the summary, you can see, again, is much longer. So we have a lot more information on both of the characters. We also have more information on this particular, the time that this story is taking place. It's taking place in the middle of a heat wave. You know, we hear more about what he's seeing. We hear more about why he's in a wheelchair, for example. So you're including a lot more information here in the summary. Good job if you answered it correctly. Let's do another one. Ready? Guess the film. A cowboy doll is profoundly threatened and jealous when a new spaceman figure supplants him as top toy in a boy's room. I'm sure you guys guessed this one. All right, that was the logline for Toy Story for the first one. And of course, there are 4 of them. Here's a little picture that shows you the evolution of Woody. What would the premise be for the first Toy Story? Try and brainstorm the premise and write that in the comments section. And while you're doing that, let's take a look at the summary. So here's the summary. Again, you've got 6 paragraphs. It completely expands upon the world, the characters, the plot, the setup, the challenges, and gives us a sense of what is going to happen in this story. Does this give you an idea of the difference between a premise, a logline, and a summary? If so, go ahead and head on over to our Google Doc. And in our Google Doc, we are going to, you guys are going to, write the premise and the logline for the primary texts that we read this semester. So let me head on over there. Here we go. So here is your workbook. And let's go on over here. Whoops, there we go. So for class 3, you see it says premises and loglines for Dark Crystal and Sherlock. So here, what I'd love for you guys to do is to take a little bit of time and go through each one of the primary texts that we read this semester. So we have Dark Crystal, that's the original film, and Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance. That's the one that was serialized on Netflix. So here, I would like for you to write first the premise, and second, write the logline. And then for Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, do the same thing. Premise, logline. Give that a try and see what comes up. You can all join in and write, because of course a premise and a logline can and will be written differently depending on the writer, and you guys are all different writers. So write a premise and a logline for each one, and let's see what you guys come up with. Go ahead and do the same thing for the Dark Crystal creation myths. Premise, logline, so on and so forth. Dark Crystal game, the Dark Crystal Discovery Adventure, Shadows of the Dark Crystal, that's the young adult novel. And then, of course, we switched over halfway through your seminar genre classes, we switched over to study Sherlock. So first of all, with Sherlock, I would like for you guys to write a premise and a logline for the overall show. Do you think you could narrow this down for the premise for season 1 and the logline for season 1? What happens here is, you would have to pitch a logline. You would have to pitch a logline again for the entire show. So that maybe includes your ideas for each season. Maybe you have an idea for 5 seasons of Sherlock, and you go into BBC and they're like, okay, what's the story about? So you pitch the logline for the entire series. But more specifically, they're like, okay, maybe we're going to invest in 1 season and see how it goes. So you have to also have a logline and a pitch for season 1. And then they're going to say, okay, great, season 1, we got it. How many episodes are there? And you say, okay, there are 3 episodes. The first episode is A Study in Pink. And Study in Pink, you give the logline for that. Then you do the same thing for episode 2, The Blind Banker, and episode 3, The Great Game. That's going to give the BBC execs an idea of the logline for each one of these. The overall show, the overall seasons, and then for the first season, the logline for each of the 3 episodes. All right, so I would like for you guys to write a premise and logline for each one of those, and then move on to the Sherlock Holmes board game that we played. And of course, the Sherlock Holmes board game, it had a lot of scenarios, but we only played the one that had to do with the first Jack the Ripper case. So write the premise for that, and then expand on that and write what the logline would be. This goes for Moriarty, a novel, and the short story A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman. And of course, the final text that we studied was the film Mr. Holmes. So give each of those a try and start practicing what it's like to write and recognize a premise and to write and recognize a logline. You can do it with other things. What was the last book that you read, for example? Hopefully it wasn't Moriarty. Hopefully you've read a book since then. Because it's been like 2 or 3 weeks. So no, but seriously, go back through Goodreads and see what books you've read and try writing a premise and a logline for each of these. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. It becomes really easy once you start practicing. So in the second point here, what I'd like you guys to do then is start brainstorming the premise and the logline for your semester project. So what ideas did you come up with in your brainstorming, which is up? You started brainstorming here. And then you brainstormed the premises for your 3-episode mini TV series here. And here you said, this series is about X. The first season will explore X. Episode 1 will do this. Episode 2 will do that. And we'll conclude with episode 3, which will do this, right? So taking that idea or those ideas, go ahead and write them here. What will the premise and the logline be for your project? It's okay to write, 3 or 4 of them here. We haven't actually decided yet which one we're going to choose. And that's okay. We want to have something, we want to have 3 or 4 to choose from. And then the third point here, we will save that for class 4 when we talk about story paradigms, plot paradigms, okay? So go ahead and do that now, and I will see you for class 4. Thanks so much. See you soon.